Welcome to another episode of Focal Point. My name is Chris deBoer, and I am the Executive Director of Reform Perspective Foundation. On today's episode, we are joined by Arnold Viersen, Member of Parliament for Peace River Westlock in Alberta. And today we want to discuss two very important issues. The first being euthanasia and the legislation surrounding that and changes in legislation. And the second being a conversion therapy ban. What does it mean? What are the consequences? So Arnold, thanks so much for spending some time with me today.
Well, thank you, Chris. It's my pleasure, and always happy to contribute to the work of Reform Perspective. I think they do great work, and thank you for taking on this new role there. And I hear that you're now a doctor, so now I have to call you Dr. deBoer. That's exciting news.
Well, thanks so much, and you call me Chris, and I'll call you Arnold.
All right.
Hey, Arnold, when I think about these two topics, I think about this term autonomy that I noticed when it came to euthanasia. The government really stressed autonomy, the rule of self, as being a fundamental value that they have for promoting euthanasia, while it seems to me in the conversion therapy ban, it's the very opposite. They've taken away the autonomy, the rule of self, as they are promoting legislation to restrict our freedoms. So maybe we could start by having you answer or explain how you see the irony there, how these 2 points of legislation demonstrate an inconsistency in values.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't much thought about it in those terms before, and this is something that happens across the suite of issues that the government deals with. Is that the government is a system, and most people deal in relationship. And I see this all the time, is that folks expect the government to act logically. They expect they expect there to be some consistency, but there isn't necessarily, right? Like there's often you get two because we live in a democracy, because we live on public polling opinion, because we live on the vote, you will sometimes get noticeably like contradictory things happen because we end up with a vote. So people are in favor of one thing and another thing, and because the majority vote that you get to includes different people, you can end up with things that seemingly contradict each other or are at odds with each other, and yet because it's a different suite of people that push one issue and another suite of people, so once you get to 51%, your thing becomes the law, right? But the group that makes up 51% of the population isn't the same group all of the time, right? Like, for example, if we have 5 people, you, me, my wife, your wife, and William, who works for me here, one time it can be me, my wife, and William voting for one thing, and the next time it can be your wife, my wife, and me voting for something, and that's not the same group of people, but they win the vote often. And so that's the thing that everybody needs to remember about politics, is that it mostly comes down to math. The ideas are important, the ideas matter, but at the end of the day, it comes down to the math of the issue. And so the 51%, the 50 plus 1% that most of our democracy operates on isn't necessarily lead to logical outcomes. It leads to if you can get the 51% of the vote, you'll get the 51% of the vote. And so that's where we end up with this, is that the folks that are pursuing the expansion of euthanasia in the country may not have anything to do with the folks that are pursuing the conversion therapy ban, right? It's a different group of people, and you see that kind of across the board, just in the votes in the House of Commons, right? All but 15 members of the Conservative Party voted against the expansion of euthanasia yesterday in the House of Commons. Yet on the conversion therapy ban, I expect that vote to be quite a bit different. We haven't had that vote yet, but I expect it to be more closer to like 50% of the Conservative Party, one way or the other, right? And so that's the reality, is that you get on one issue, you get these, like, on one issue it's the rights and privileges of people that we're all concerned about, and the next time that isn't at all the case, right? I think that explains it, but it doesn't help the average Canadian who would like to have a logical government that is predictable and make that fits in inside of a coherent worldview. And that's something that Reform Perspective works for all the time, and that's something that Christians have, is this like coherent worldview. But it doesn't democracy doesn't necessarily lend itself to coming up with outcomes that or there's no demands for outcomes of the votes to fit inside this coherent worldview. And so that's...
Well, I think your opening sentence about government as a system is very important point there, and the idea of not everything is relational, right? So you're on the ground level, you deal with relationships, but when you're functioning as a government, that's a different ball of wax. And consistency of worldview application clearly is not evident.
And that's that systems versus relationship. I see this most starkly when I sit on Northern Aboriginal Affairs Committee, and you see that the most starkly with the First Nations, right? They speak entirely in relationship, and they're like, "How can our government be doing this to us? And doesn't the government care, right?" And it's like, well, no, it's a system. It doesn't really care. It's not a person. It's not a... It doesn't have great opinions, and it is incapable of caring, even though we try to make the systems work to allow human flourishing. That doesn't. It's two different things.
So you mentioned yesterday that the vote came already to expand euthanasia. Maybe you could remind us a little bit about how long has euthanasia been legalized here in Canada? What were kind of the original parameters, and now where are we today?
Well, the fight to legalize euthanasia goes back probably 2 decades, but I entered the story on it back in 2015 when I got elected to the House of Commons. The Supreme Court of Canada had struck down the area around suicide, and so and around, they basically just there was can't remember exactly the name of the case again, the Carter case, the Carter decision. That's the one where she just said that it was her right to, because she was incapable of committing suicide on her own, because she wasn't able-bodied, she should be able to get the government to help her out with that. And the Supreme Court agreed with her back, I think it was 2013 or 2014. But they just said to the Parliament, come up with a law around this. And so we see activist groups are unable to get legislation on things, are unable to run elections on this stuff, so they use the courts to push their agenda. So when I got elected, one of the first pieces of legislation we had to deal with back in 2015 was C-14, and that was the regime around, as the Liberals call it, medical assistance in dying. I call it euthanasia or assisted suicide. At that time, there was two major components that your death had to be reasonably foreseeable, and you had to have a grievous and irremediable condition. Those were like the two basic elements around that. So they changed the law that you would not be found guilty of homicide. So there's an exemption to the homicide provisions in the criminal code if you were a medical doctor or a healthcare professional assisting somebody to end their life. And then they laid out the criteria around who is eligible to be assisted in ending their own life. And so that's 2015, 2016, when the House of Commons passed that bill. Then within 3 years, there was a junior court in Quebec, and they had a court case there, and they struck down the reasonably foreseeable clause of that. They saying that you wouldn't need to necessarily, your death didn't have to be reasonably foreseeable. You had to have a grievous and irremediable condition, but you dying in a reasonably foreseeable time, which back with the original bill, we found that those things were kind of nebulous anyways, but that was struck down. And so there, rather than appeal that process, because it was a junior court in Quebec, the government of Canada never appealed that process and instead introduced a bill last spring, and then again this fall, and it's known as C7 now, to rectify the law around the reasonably foreseeable clause. And so they've made two streams now. The law is getting very convoluted there. So you have one stream where if your death is reasonably foreseeable, you're suffering from a grievous and irremediable condition, you can be euthanized the same day you request it. And they have another stream where your death's not reasonably foreseeable, where you can pick a day some point in the future in order to euthanize yourself or have somebody help you commit suicide. So that is the two streams we now live in. And the disabilities community has come out very strongly against this new regime because they say it creates two classes of Canadians. One, if you're an able-bodied Canadian and you walk into the hospital and say, I just want it all to end, they will work very hard to get you into a suicide prevention program of which there are many in Canada. If you are in a wheelchair and have an underlying medical condition and you walk into the hospital and say, I just want to end it all, they will say, yeah, here, we can help you with that. There's some waiting periods and that kind of thing. But so that's where the disabilities community is saying, like there's a big gap between able-bodied Canadians and those living with disabilities. And so that's probably the crux. That's the Coles Notes version of the trajectory over the last 5 years. Yeah, and to that end, we voted. The House of Commons voted on the 10th of December here to send it to the Senate. So it's passed all the way through the Senate or the House of Commons now, and that essentially will become the law, barring some dramatic events in the Senate.
So if we can just kind of dig a little bit around this, if I recall correctly, the original legislation had a 5-year review.
That is correct, yes.
And that 5 years got cut short because of a junior court in Quebec?
No. So that's a big frustration as well. So rather than appealing the junior court decision, which the government should have done, we kind of the justice minister continues to say, no, the 5-year review will still happen. Right. And so that's what's frustrating about the current bill, that like C7 that we were just dealing with, is that the court decision was very, very narrow cast just around the reasonably foreseeable piece. But then the government threw in like the removal of multiple witnesses that have to witness that you're consenting to your own death. They removed the 10-day waiting period that had been in there. Those things weren't even talked about in the court decision. And so we said, like, those, like, if that's what you want to propose, that kind of stuff should come out of a 5-year review, right? So the justice minister is adamant that the 5-year review will still happen, and he's saying that he's planning it, so that there will be another opportunity, another discussion around this issue very soon, I imagine. But yeah, at this point, they have not introduced any legislation, nor have they struck a special committee. The health committee doesn't seem to have any studies going on with it. So yeah, we will see.
Then the other question that I have is about maybe it's not a hard question, but I'm not sure. Could the Conservative Party or any other group, I'm thinking here, for example, some of those disabilities groups, could they have appealed the decision of Quebec? Like, what could
No,
somebody else?
no,
Okay.
no. It comes down to the justice minister has to so it basically the court basically rules that the legislature it was being unconstitutional, and so then it's the justice minister's job to defend the work of the legislature, right? So it's not between it's not the court decision is not between individuals. It's between it's like this person against the government of Canada. Um, I just off the top of my head, I can't remember what the name of the court case was, but it will be the name, their name, and then the government of Canada on the other side. And the government of Canada lost that battle there, and then it's because they're on the losing side. It's their opportunity to appeal it. So that's where that's.
Okay. No third party could appeal this decision because it's quote unquote none of their business.
Yeah, they're not an actor. Like you can only appeal decisions that are against you, right? That's kind of how it works. So.
Okay. And if we think about,
I can expand on that a little bit yet. There's like a major frustration in that is that in Canada, so in the United States, you have the president and the executive body, and it's kind of all captured in the presidency. And so and because he doesn't sit in the legislature in the same way, there's you can clearly see how the executive is separate from the legislature. But in Canada, the executive, the prime minister and his cabinet, they sit in the legislature, right? And so the line is a little bit more blurry as to like who's the executive and who's not. What's frustrating about the lack of that judgment being appealed is that the legislature in Canada, the parliament, had just 3.5 years prior built this law. It was a brand new law, and it's the government, government, like the executive, the prime minister and his cabinet. It's their job to enact the decisions of the parliament. They're the executive, they're the executor, they execute the decisions. Now, what's frustrating about that is that whether the government, whether the justice minister agreed with the law or not when that law was put into place, it's still his job to defend it, right? That's just his job. Like it's not for him to editorialize what he will defend and not defend. It's his job to defend the decisions of the parliament. And so he is personally he personally voted against C14 back in 2016-17 because he didn't feel that it went far enough. And so when there's an expansion by the courts, he doesn't appeal it because his personal views on it are such that he wants to see it opened up further. And that's frustrating because it's not like he doesn't understand his job. His job is to defend the decisions of the parliament and to enact the decisions of the parliament, not use his position to push his own personal agenda.
No, I think that's an important and helpful point for us to see again how this government is functioning in Canada. Some of the concerns that people might have. This is a concern that we might not even have known about, right? The way you're describing this, I think, we want to have a sense of trust that we're going to play fair, that democracy will work properly. But when you get some of these kinds of somewhat personal opinions going this way, you start to see more politics and less democracy, if I can put it that way.
It's the parliament buildings. There's always politics.
Oh, for sure. You gave us that Cole's notes. I just wanted to ask a little bit about this same day opportunity. So the 10-day waiting period it seems to have been erased. Can you just
Yeah.
expand on that a little bit? We used to have the 10-day waiting period. Who no longer needs that 10 days?
Folks that still meet both of their criteria. So this is what's so interesting is, so the 10-day waiting period applied to folks who's had a grievous and irremediable condition and their death was reasonably foreseeable when they requested it, when they requested being euthanized, then there was a 10-day waiting period. However, it could be waived in the doctor could waive that even if they felt that they were likely to die of natural causes before the 10 days were up.
Sure.
Now, if you still, this is why this bill does more than what the court decision says, because the court decision only talked about removing the reasonably foreseeable clause. If this bill expanded to those people whose suffering grievous and their suffering is grievous and irremediable, and their death is reasonably foreseeable, so both they still apply to them, then they can die on the same day they request it.
Wow.
So,
And
yeah.
and then the other group has the grievous and irremediable condition,
but
but
not reasonably foreseeable.
so and
Yeah.
they could request assistance in dying, euthanasia,
Yeah.
at a future date.
Yeah.
Is that future date have to be at least 10 days? Is that future?
Yeah. So that the future date has to be out 90 days.
Okay.
Yeah. And so the disabilities community is somewhat frustrated with that. They said because in many cases you can't even get a wheelchair in 90 days, right? So you need a new wheelchair or something like that. It often takes more than 90 days to get a new wheelchair. So you can be offered made in 90 days and a new wheelchair in 120 days, right? Like.
So if I understand it correctly, is it fair to say that if I had a grievous condition, an irremediable condition,
Yeah.
and now let's say I requested it today to be euthanized.
Yeah.
In 4 months.
Yeah.
Death has not come any closer. Like I have no increased foreseeable likelihood of death. So that hasn't changed. But my wish to die remains. So
Yes.
because I've waited the 90 plus days, I can now be
Euthanized. Yeah.
Okay.
So this is like somebody that's suffering from blindness, or somebody that's got in a car accident and is paralyzed, right?
Right.
Their death is not they're not likely to die from their condition.
Right.
But their condition is grievous and irremediable.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So,
I see.
yeah. So the only caveat to that in this bill is that this does not include mental illness.
Right.
So.
That's of course a really challenging question, of course, because if I'm depressed because I'm blind, I might have a mental illness because of my blindness, but there are many blind people who have a great joy in their life.
Yeah.
Right. So
and
how do we know?
Yeah, but that's why the disabilities community is so outraged about this bill, is because if you're able-bodied and you're depressed, all of the suicide prevention measures that this country has to offer will come to your aid. However, if you're disabled and you're depressed and you go to the hospital, you are now eligible, right?
Okay, I see. Yeah, I understand
right?
now.
Yeah, because it's like so you're not gonna, if your death is not reasonably foreseeable, you're not gonna get euthanized tomorrow, but you go on there, you wait the 90 days and you be euthanized with no real seemingly attempt to or need to say no, there's nothing wrong here, you just need to go get some counseling because your life's worth living. Like,
Okay, so the able-bodied are going to get the counseling, and they're going to be, taught and encouraged that life is worth living.
yeah,
Whereas if you have a disability and of any sort, of a
yeah,
grievous or irremediable condition,
yeah.
if you have one of those, you're not necessarily going to get those helps and be told that life is worth living, etc.
Yeah. So I don't know if you've seen any of the committee hearings there, but there was a Mr. Foley who was there, and this goes one step further, I guess. And he, like, already with he's got a grievous and irremediable condition, and his death is reasonably foreseeable. So he fits in both of those categories. He is living in a hospital bed, and it's just been insinuated to him several times now that, like, there's no hope for you. This, like, you're gonna be in this bed until you pass away. Did you know that euthanasia is available to you? Right? Like, it's been offered to him several times, and so that's a whole nother piece that we tried for an amendment that said the whole discussion around assisted suicide should not be brought up by anyone other than the person.
Yeah.
Right? Interestingly, the NDP had a opposite amendment saying that nothing would, there would be no penalty to anybody that brought it up.
Right.
Right. So, yeah, that's the disabilities community, since for the last 4 years, have already felt the pressure to be euthanized. This is only going to make it greater.
Right.
Right. The fact is that now they're all eligible only because they have a grievous and irremediable condition.
Right. Okay.
So,
No, this is helpful. And
yeah.
Yeah.
So I shared on my Facebook page. I think it's a poignant image of a clinic that says on the front door, it says suicide prevention, and on the side door it says assisted suicide, and there's stairs going to the front door and a wheelchair ramp to the side door. And that is where this law brings us, that we're going to. So,
Yeah, and your description of it now drives the point home. Like,
yeah,
there, I couldn't really understand, because I watched some of the press conferences that were led by Tamara Jansen. She had hosted some doctors, and
yeah,
really a lot of the media coverage wasn't sharing the concerns of a very broad medical community and the disabled community, unless there were these press conferences, and you'd have to find them, and they weren't just displayed all over the media anywhere.
yeah.
So I really appreciated those points, but I couldn't really understand this two-tier system,
Mm-hmm.
and the why the disabled community was as strongly opposed to it. But you've made it clear to me
Good.
why this is, how this has become a two-tiered system. That's very dangerous. It's saying to the disabled people, people with disabilities, that your life is worth less. Ultimately,
Yeah.
will help the
Well,
able-bodied.
if nothing else, maybe not worth less, but they are constantly eligible.
Right.
Right. They're, like, just for the fact that there is, like, because it used to be the two requirements, grievous and irremediable and reasonably foreseeable. So somebody with blindness, their death was never reasonably foreseeable, right? Now, with the removal of that, they are continually eligible,
Yeah.
right? And as we've seen, and this is a frustration that I've back with C14, I didn't, the liberals call it medically assistance in dying. And I had a whole series of amendments, 44 amendments back then, to remove the whole idea of this being medical, right? Because I said, this is not a treatment option. And that I'm worried that this will become a treatment option. And you see, I don't know if the debate around it, the NDP really pushed that this is just another option. Like, you've got cancer, we've got radiation, we've got chemotherapy, and we've got medical assistance in dying, right? Like those are the three options you got, right? That's where they like to push it, and so that's where we're ending up with this legislation. The disabilities community is just like outraged about it because they're just saying like, we are all of the time now eligible because we have a disability. We are eligible every day of the week to be euthanized, right? It's a 90-day waiting period and all this, but we are eligible every day, whereas an able-bodied Canadian is not eligible for MAID.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it seems to me that our current government would be more inclined to say, you know what, you're right, that's not fair. Able-bodied people should also have the constant right to end their own life, right? So our hope would be to go the other way and say, hold on a second, nobody should have that right. But unfortunately, I think our governing authorities would try to make it equal by allowing both abled and disabled to have the same rights to end their own life within 90 days.
Yeah.
90 days.
Yeah.
Very interesting. The other topic we wanted to address, Arnold, was the effort to ban conversion therapy for minors. And I stress the minors part only because it is slightly different than what's going on in Alberta. In a lot of your city councils, there has been a bylaw already banning conversion therapy.
Yeah.
But also for adults, whereas the one in front of the committees that's, I guess, going to be presented now to the House of Commons is focusing on minors, at least right now.
Yeah.
It's a bill that's supposed to is seeking to criminalize conversion therapy. I would ask you if you could define conversion therapy, but that might be
that's the crux of the matter. Yeah, that's the crux of the matter. So I got the bill in front of me right here. It's been modified since this, because it went through committee. They voted on it yesterday. So what it was conversion therapy means a practice, treatment, or service designed to change a person's sexual orientation to heterosexual or gender identity to cisgender, or to repress or reduce non-heterosexual attraction or sexual behavior. For greater certainty, this definition does not include a practice, treatment, or service that relates to a person's gender transition or a person's exploration of their identity or its development. So it is a very vague definition: practice, treatment, or service, and it's also a unidirectional definition. So it's only conversion therapy only applies to if you're changing a person's sexual orientation to heterosexual from homosexual. That's interesting. Or to reduce non-heterosexual sexual attraction or behavior. So what's interesting, Jojo Ruba, I don't know if you've followed him. He's been on this a lot, but just saying that that part around reducing non-heterosexual attraction is that if you're and sexual behavior is basically like if you're you say to your daughter that she can't have her boyfriend sleep over, that would not be considered a problem to this law. But if you said to your daughter that she can't have her girlfriend sleep over, that might be part of the problem, right? And the whole thing around sexual behavior and the government trying to regulate sexual behavior is very interesting. So we had quite a campaign to fix the definition, and instead of fixing the definition, they made it they brought it open to include gender expression as well. So that's the only amendments that we got, or that were brought into the bill. We didn't move those amendments, but that's there. So The other thing I want to point out around the definition of gender or of conversion therapy is the government had put on their Justice Department website that this would not include private conversations with teachers, parents, religious leaders. It's on the website, but it's not in the bill. It's not part of the law. Interestingly, when we pointed that out and we moved an amendment that used the words from their website, they actually changed their website and they added one word, any conversations that don't affirm. So it was interesting that when we used their own words, then they had to change their own words to make it sure it goes in one direction again. So that's where we're at with this. The other thing that was interesting is that same government website that was explaining this new law had endorsements from a number of organizations from across Canada. Well, one being the Canadian Psychological Association. In the Canadian, there was two things of note in that endorsement letter. One is they never mentioned gender identity or gender expression at all. It was noticeably absent because there is no conversion therapy definition by any organization in the world that defines conversion therapy as having anything to do with gender identity or gender expression. So that's noticeably absent. The other thing that was of note from my perspective was in the opening paragraph of the letter from the Canadian Psychological Association, they also were concerned around the definition, not necessarily the same, definitely not the same concerns I have, but they just said that they wanted to clarify what they deemed to be their definition. And they clearly stated in that definition that prayer and religious rights can be included in the definition of conversion therapy. So this is clearly a law intended to be a warning shot, a shot over the bow to Christian communities that your prayers may be deemed to be conversion therapy. And we got no clarity on that. We were assured that private conversations would not be prosecuted, but the law doesn't say anything about private conversations. It says practice, treatment, or service, and so a religious leader having a conversation, is that a practice or treatment? A teacher having a conversation, as soon as you're in an official capacity of any sort, is that a practice or treatment or service, right? We have worship services. Those are right. Religious right. How do we define all these things? So those documents will be used in the court case to help define it. It's just really frustrating that we couldn't have defined it in the law. So.
Well, it is, and of course, again, that lack of definition, of course, it's clear enough in a sense as, I think Chris Wells has been a witness for Calgary and in Alberta quite a bit. He's been at these townships and he's becoming the expert, but very, very dangerous in his agenda. This lack of definition. But then when you seek the clarity, they don't want to clarify because, in fact, those pastoral conversations are going to be illegal. Your parental conversation with your children, they say, no, don't worry about it. But we do worry about it because it's not clear. Like you say, that the definition is so obscure or so broad that anything and everything kind of fits under the umbrella.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's fascinating in the fact that we point out that prayer could be caught up in this kind of a ban, right? And they say no, that's definitely not the case. But then you read their own website, and one of their endorsement letters that they put up on their own website says that it could include prayer, right? So
no,
yeah.
and I think the Christian community and other concerned communities would indeed, I think this is going to have to come to a court at some point, and we'll have Christians and others take it to court for having conversations, trying to help their children understand a healthy sexual orientation and behaviors.
Yeah, and Jojo Ruba, like he just says, like this law fails to recognize that I exist, right? He's somebody that goes for treatment and counseling. He gets the practices, treatment, and services required to help him deal with his same-sex attraction. He's a devout Christian and needs those kinds of supports. And so he just says this law does not allow him to exist, and so he will be the first to challenge it, I'm sure.
Yeah, I had Jojo on a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and we discussed some of these issues. You know, I thought he really stressed rightly to the committee when he spoke with Andre Schutten from ARPA that this conversion therapy ban discriminates against the very people it purports to help.
Yeah.
Right? By not allowing someone like Jojo to get the help that he wants, which is where that autonomy point comes in, right?
Yeah.
He, as an autonomous adult, that doesn't have these rights. So again, the federal government didn't address adults in the legislation, right? But even as parents, your parental rights are being attacked here. Again, government overreach and saying we are more equipped to parent your children and teach them all about sexuality and identity, more so than you, mom and dad. Because mom and dad, you're going to do it wrong. We'll do it right. We'll do it for you. And in fact, mom and dad, if you do it this way, you're breaking the law. So I think there's some real concern there.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily state it that explicitly, but the regulation of sexual behavior, a couple of generations ago, the prime minister of this country said that the state had no business in the bedrooms of the nation, and here we are trying to regulate sexual behavior. We've come a long way, I suppose you could say, but
so when you think about the idea that this addresses minors, so have as strong a concern as I just expressed regarding parental rights?
Well, I would have the concern around parental rights. Like again, it's the unidirectionalism of this, right? Is that like the parental rights are totally intact provided you go in line with the government. I don't think that like the federal government isn't going to be instructing your children in one direction, right? That comes down to provincial issues and that kind of thing, right? So the parental rights, we will have to wait and see. The government's not going to be instructing your children, but are you going to be able to instruct your children? That's where I just wouldn't state it quite the same as you did. Right? Like I don't think the government's going to come and instruct you, instruct your children. But will you be prosecuted for teaching your children a particular thing? Yes, that is indeed the case. And so maybe I'm splitting hairs there, but the government, like that's just a little bit too far. Like I don't think they're going to show up and start instructing your child, but what they are going to do is prevent you from instructing your child. That's right. And that is a total infraction on parental rights. 100%.
So Bill, this conversion therapy ban, Bill C6, has now just, I think, if I understand correctly, yesterday passed the committee and will now go to the House of Commons for approval before it goes to the Senate.
So there is, so it's kind of interesting. There's like first reading is like the introduction of the bill into the House. There's no votes associated with that. Second reading is to send it to committee. And then once it comes back from committee, then there's a report stage. So the bill is then reported to the House. So that's called a report stage. Sometimes there's a action taken at report stage, so we can move amendments. We can have votes on those amendments at report stage. And then the House accepts the report. And then you have the final reading of the bill. So like with all the amendments and everything else, it's read, the bill is read again, at which time we get to debate it once again. And then there's the third reading vote, which then says, okay, the House of Commons is satisfied with the bill, and then we send it off to the committee or to the Senate for the Senate to do their work on it. So in January, the end of January, one of the first orders of business, I imagine, will be the report stage of this bill and third reading.
So the report stage where you will have opportunity then, if I understand you correctly, still to debate and make amendments, but likelihood is that they're not going to fly unless there's this groundswell of petitions and interactions with MPs, et cetera. So would you encourage us still then, so do we still have time, as it were, on our side to contact our MPs and to let them know that we still want to pursue fix the definition?
100%. 100%. Yeah. Because at committee, there's only 7 members of parliament in total at committee.
Right.
And so they are the ones that vote on these amendments and things like that. When it comes back to the House, we can move our amendments. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but we can move our amendments again, and then every member of parliament has to vote on those amendments.
Right.
And so while you might have some ideological members on the committee, for example, Randall Garrison, who is very much an activist on this issue, and he's on the committee and he's pushing as hard as he can. The rest of his party may not actually feel as strongly as he does about these things, and so we may be able to, at report stage, move amendments and have votes on those amendments and see if there's fault lines in some of the other parties around this stuff.
Well, yeah, that actually brings me to maybe just a slightly different question about the voting process, because if I understood you correctly, the passing of Bill C7 included yay votes, in favor votes of about 15 conservative members, and then also some nay votes, some negatives from the Liberal side.
Yeah.
So on these kinds of votes, I guess you would call them moral issues, etc., are they always a free vote? Or like what happened to the whipping and the party lines type of thing?
Yeah, so there is, first of all, there's no such thing as a free vote. A vote always costs you something. But yeah, there are some votes where like the party uses all of its means of discipline to ensure that they get the vote that they're pursuing, and then there's other votes where they don't. Interestingly, Aaron O'Toole was very upfront, saying like these are going to be free votes, and our party will have multiple positions on these votes and that kind of stuff. So the whole idea of free vote is very much a Conservative Party idea. It's part of our party constitution. It's been coined by us, and so inside the Conservative Party, that's the free vote idea is the thing. Now, it was interesting that at the last minute, all of a sudden, one of the members from the Liberal Party said that he will not be voting for C7, the euthanasia bill. He's a doctor, a Catholic doctor from northern Ontario, and then informed us that in fact the Liberal Party was having a free vote, which was kind of a new, like, I don't think that the Liberal Party has anything in their documents talking about free votes. Their party constitution or anything like that. I don't think it's really the free vote. So I equipped with him. I said, "Oh, I'm glad to see that free votes are becoming contagious. I'm hoping next the NDP will be informing us that they're having free votes as well." And so, there's a culture within our party of having not having whipped votes on contentious social issues. I to some degree, I like to think that we have free votes on most everything, but there's these two issues for sure have been free votes.
So using, first of all, encouraging our listeners with the conversion therapy ban then to reach out to MPs and to encourage them to fix the definition. And I would say, I'm not sure what the rules are, so correct me if I'm wrong in advising, but it seems to me we have to get the Liberals to understand the significant concerns that we do have.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, if I live in your riding and I tell you the concerns I have, my own riding, we have a conservative MP. I don't think she needs from me or from my community 1,500 letters that all say the same thing. She's going to say, yes, I agree with you.
Yeah.
So how do I let the Liberals know that there's 1,500 people that are asking to fix the definition?
Both are legitimate. It is extremely helpful to have 1,500 people that in your riding that agree with you on the position. Mm-hmm. When a member of parliament speaks out on an issue or votes the right way on an issue and only hears the other side of the issue, or has an imbalance in the amount of correspondence that they get, they may start to question whether they made the right decision. So just because you have a conservative member of parliament who probably agrees with you on the issues doesn't mean you shouldn't let them know, because even the form letters, the easy mail from ARPA and that kind of stuff, it's important because we then know, we know that there were 1,500 people that cared enough about this issue. Like maybe they didn't handwrite their own letter, but they cared enough about it to let me know that this is their phone number, their name, and where they live. They gave that information to me and said, I care about this issue, and this is the way I want you to vote on it. Because a lot of the times we're doing the right thing, and you're hearing a lot from the other side, right? Yeah. You meet the opposition for sure, and it just, so that's I would say both and. The other thing is that stuff that you get from outside of your riding typically doesn't register a whole bunch, right? Letters that you get, unless you're somebody with standing in another way, right? So if you're a medical doctor and you have specific experience, if you're a guy like JoJo who has a story to tell, that works fairly well across the country, right? It doesn't matter where you're from. But if it's an ARPA easy mail, and they're not from the riding, it's kind of like happy to hear it, but not as. However, there are some MPs will reach out on a particular issue. They'll send out a petition that's like for across the country. That kind of stuff is helpful if the petition is, even if the petitioner, like the MP that's hosting the petition, isn't from your riding. That is something that is always helpful to have more names on those kinds of petitions. And so don't worry about signing a petition from an MP from Newfoundland that you agree with that petition. It's great.
Okay, helpful. And then we know that Bill C-7 now is going to the Senate. should there be a campaign to senators? Should we be writing letters to senators and telling them, hey, even though the House of Commons did its thing, we're deeply concerned?
Yeah, there's 100%. The other thing is that senators are less in the spotlight than members of parliament. They don't get as much mail, so they're more responsive to folks that reach out to them. And so please, by all means, reach out to the senators. Find out who your senators are. I have to admit, I don't even know the names of half the senators. So yeah, it's. But I do know that like our local ARPA group here in Bard, Nerlandia, we had a bunch of teenage girls that went and met with one of our brand new senators here in Alberta, just recently appointed, and they have got a great relationship with her now. And so yeah, work those relationships with senators and send them some mail, phone their office, let them know what you think about this. C7 in particular, yeah, the disability community, stand up and defend them.
Yeah, no, very, very helpful. And, as we think about these things, we were hoping for a better definition of conversion therapy, and we got a more obscure one. We were hoping for a greater care and consideration for vulnerable Canadians, so that they would not succumb, in a sense, to euthanasia, and we seem to have lost that one too somewhat. So maybe you could comment as we close our time together, as a godly man, as a Christian, you see the laws changing literally right before your eyes and in your hands, in ways that are contrary to biblical principles. So how do you find your ability to keep moving and to keep serving and to keep working when so much is going in a wrong direction?
Well, I can only do what I can do. That's one of the things that keeps me rolling. I also have I get a lot of support from the Reform community. Folks, it's the craziest things. Like when I'm really discouraged for some reason, then my phone starts ringing and it's somebody from back home, like, "Hey Arnold, just thank you for what you're doing." And I'm like, "Why are you phoning?" They're like, "No reason, just thought I should let you know." Right? So the Lord works in mysterious ways in that regard. The other thing is like, realize that politics is mostly math. And while the ideas are important, the number of votes that we get on things is where it matters. And so I spend a lot of times trying to corral votes, right? Find out who cares about the issues, how do we advance it. The timing of the votes is important. Like for C7, for example, I was working hard to try to get enough people to speak to the bill so that we could get the debate to go past 2:00 on Thursday. If the debate would have gone past 2:00 on Thursday, the vote wouldn't have happened until the end of January. That would have given me another 2 months to help try to convince a few more people to vote in the right direction on it, right? Were we ever going to defeat it? I don't know if we'd ever defeat it, but the more votes we have against it, particularly from like the Liberals or the NDP party, so we'd had the one guy, I think we had 3 Liberals altogether vote against it. But yeah, we had one guy flip fairly recently on the issue. There was a few more. So that like, when you realize what the number of votes that you have, it's not as discouraging as you might think, right? Like, as you can anticipate where this is going to go, right? You know what the work you have to do is, but it's not like it was a cliffhanger in terms of right? Like the fact that we got to where we were and that we had Liberals voting against it, and the Liberals declaring a free vote on it. Those were wins, right? They don't seem like a win. The bill is still terrible. The law of the land is still terrible, all that kind of stuff. But to keep that like where we could have been and where we ended up in perspective is helpful. So and yeah, the power of prayer and the power of the communion of saints is really important. We have a Wednesday morning Bible study on Parliament Hill every week. I've got a Thursday morning Bible study I participate in as well. We come together with groups of Christians in both of those, pray together. Yeah, that's kind of a replenishing moment, right? Those times where you're struggling, you struggle together a little bit. So that's the those are the things that keep me motivated. The ARPA crowd, I know that Reform Perspective and ARPA are some of the similar people often. But yeah, the ARPA has their office like spitting distance from my office in Ottawa. Yeah, so when I'm feeling like it's not going anywhere, go over there and have coffee at the ARPA office and see where they're at, see what's going on in their world. And so those are the kind of the things keep me rolling. The other thing that's really cool is to have more Reform folks being sent to Ottawa, working hard to get other Reform folks elected, having young people come and work in our offices. I always say that politics is less than the sum of its parts. Now you might say, Arnold, you're saying that wrong. It's like organizations are supposed to be greater than the sum of their parts. I said, yeah, that's true, but politics is less than the sum of its parts because all the parts are often are pulling the thing apart rather than putting it together. So for every person that's advocating in one direction on an issue, there's probably another person on the other side advocating in the opposite direction. And so if we want to see outcomes that we like, we need more parts, we need more pieces, we need more people. And so anyone that's interested in coming to Ottawa and helping out, reach out. There's always positions available on the Hill. There's always positions that we can work on, and particularly young folks that aren't quite sure where they want to go in life. We've got a one-year program that I participate in, where they can come and work in my office, figure out how politics works from the inside, and then go off into the world and do whatever they have to do. But they'll never lose that experience, and they'll always know. They always have seen how the sausage is made, so to speak. So yeah, those are some things that folks can get involved with.
When you went to Ottawa, you serve, you represent of course your constituents, and you represent your riding, but you also represent Christians, and you represent a way of thinking and a worldview. And it's been a blessing to see you in action and the things you advocate for. And I'd also like to commend you for the work you're doing on human trafficking, and hopefully we can have another discussion someday to learn more about that, because I see you're working hard to fight injustices there, and it's our prayer that the Lord would bless you in that work, because the more you learn about it, the more we all learn about it, the more we realize just how devastating it really is.
Yeah, in that way, just my work around ending pornography use in Canada, the Lord works in mysterious ways that too. I've been struggling with that stuff for 4 or 5 years, and all of a sudden we get an article in the New York Times last week, and now suddenly all the politicians in Ottawa are tripping over each other to try to fix this problem. So here we are. It's it's rewarding in that respect, I guess, as well. So you see 4 years of work all of a sudden being worth it. So
yeah. Hey, thanks so much for your time, and we wish you the Lord's continued blessings in your work.
Thank you for the opportunity to come and speak on your podcast, and look forward to meeting Dr. deBoer in person one day.
I'm looking forward to it, Arnold. Thank you.